Hello, everyone, and welcome to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and our Aviation Outlook webinar. I'm Alan Stolzer, Dean of the College of Aviation at the Daytona Beach campus. For our 11th webinar in the series, we welcome Peter Cerdá, who is the Regional Vice President in the Americas for the International Air Transport Association, or IATA. IATA is the trade association for the world's airlines, representing some 290 airlines, or 82% of total air traffic. IATA supports many areas of aviation activity and helps formulate industry policy on critical aviation issues. IATA's Americas region, for which Peter is Regional Vice President, is focused on serving the needs of nearly 49 member airlines spread across 22 countries in North, Central, and South America. IATA's regional office in Miami is supported by 10 field offices across the region. Key areas of focus for the region include safety and security, sustainability, reliability, development of efficient and affordable infrastructure, smarter regulation, and reducing the heavy taxes and charges imposed on aviation and air travel in many countries. Based in Miami, Cerdá leads an organization which advocates the industry's priorities with government authorities, airports, and suppliers. IATA represents this indispensable network that drives nearly $958 billion in gross domestic product in this region and generates 12.8 million jobs in the Americas. His scope of responsibility extends from North to South America with a large local presence in more than 25 countries. Cerdá has a wealth of industry experience acquired over 27 years in aviation. He has worked in various functions for IATA, and most recently, he served as Regional Director for Safety, Operations, and Infrastructure for the Americas and Atlantic until 2013. Prior to joining IATA in 1996, Mr. Cerdá started his aviation career with Iberia Airlines. Cerdá received a Bachelor of Business Administration at Florida International University and his master's degree in Aeronautics and Aviation Management from Embry-Riddle. Peter, welcome to Aviation Outlook.
Dean Stolzer, thank you very much for having me. It's a great pleasure to have this hour with you.
It's our honor. We appreciate it very much. We have a lot to talk about today. I think many people would be surprised to hear about the important role that IATA plays for the global aviation industry. So could you share a bit about the organization and its mission?
So you've provided a good overview in your opening remarks, but it depends who you speak to around the world. They may have a different meaning about what IATA represents for them. First, we are the trade association for our international airlines around the world. We have almost 300 member airlines, all sorts of sizes of airlines. In the past, we were more known as a traditional airline membership, but today we have low cost hybrid airlines, international, large, small airlines. We have, as I mentioned, 300 airlines in our membership. 30 of those airlines are on the board. So they are the ones that are giving us the direction in terms of standard setting, what our advocacy should be around the world, what we should be focusing on infrastructure improvements and needs, trying to advocate to governments the value that aviation brings to our economies and the social well-being of our citizens. We also are a settlement system for our industry. We settle on behalf of customers and airlines. Roughly $450 billion is managed by our clearinghouse and settlement systems in a year. So we are actually larger than some of the smaller countries' GDPs and some banks around the world. The only issue there is, as quickly as the money comes out, we disperse it to our customers and our members. We also accredit travel agencies around the world. So travel agencies, in order to be able to represent airline bookings, have to be accredited through IATA first. So we have a huge portfolio of services that we do, but the main mission for IATA is to lead our airline industry, particularly our airlines, to making sure that we have the right environment in place.
Very good. You explained that much better than I did. I had no idea that you accredited travel agencies. That's interesting.
It is. And actually, if you ask most of the traveling public, they probably think that IATA has something to do with travel agents, because when you go around the world, not so much in the US, but anywhere in the world, a travel agency that is accredited by IATA has to have a sticker of our logo on the entrance of that agency. So they first see the IATA logo there, not as much as on the airplanes as we used to see back in the 60s and 70s. So many people will actually think we have something to do with travel agents.
Very interesting. Well, speaking of interesting, we're certainly living in some interesting times. International passenger demand lagged the traffic levels of domestic routes in August. International traffic is measured by revenue passenger kilometers. We're still almost 90% lower compared to the same period a year ago. Many, if not most, airlines around the world are heavily dependent on international traffic. What's going to reverse that trend, Peter?
Well, obviously, if you talk to many industry leaders around the world, the first thing they'll say about the airline business right now, it's on life support. And there's not many airlines at this point that can say that the future is looking optimistic in the short term. Mm-hmm. If we look at last year, anytime throughout the year, on a given day, just a normal day, we had about 12 million passengers getting on an airplane on about 107,000 flights a day. Today, that number in terms of passenger movement is half. We're lucky we get to 6 million passengers in a day around the world. Here in the US, we almost celebrated with balloons and fireworks because we crossed the threshold of 1 million passengers in one day in the US. I believe it was yesterday. And in terms of flights, those 107,000 flights, today we have about 63,000 flights. Last year, the industry crossed an important threshold. We connected over 22,000 city pairs around the world. Never before in our history of aviation have we been better connected than we were last year. 22,000 city point connections. This year at this time, we're roughly around 16,000 city points of connection. So that means 6,000 cities somewhere around the world do not have connectivity at this point. So that is having huge implications of movement of people for business, family purposes, tourism, and the movement of goods as well, which is very, very important, particularly in this challenging environment that we're living. So we're living under unprecedented circumstances. The recovery for the industry, what we were forecasting, we're not going to see international recovery before 2024. And domestic, we're probably going to see something around end of 2022, 2023. But that's going to depend a lot on how quickly we're able to restore as an industry. We're able to get back into the air. Many countries around the world still have their borders closed, or there's severe restrictions in place, or quarantine. And just a normal fear factor of the traveling public getting on an airplane. So you put all that together and not knowing first how long it's going to take for the vaccine to be available, when will we bring public confidence back, and what the economic situation will be around the world. Will people be able to afford to travel? Will they want to travel? So I'm sorry I can't give you more of a definitive answer in terms of when, but I will say one thing, and you have a vast amount of experience in this area. Aviation is a dynamic industry. We have had to overcome so many different other challenges and crises in the past. We've had to reinvent ourselves and re-innovate ourselves as an industry. And I have no doubt we will be able to do that. Probably the difference will be, it'll take longer, and the number of airlines that will be out there may be very different from what we had before.
There are a lot of ways to measure it, but you mentioned many of them, and I guess no matter what metric you're using at this point, at least today, it's not strong, and we need to see a lot of improvement. A lot of experts believe that a full recovery is dependent on a vaccine, and I know you mentioned vaccine. I'm wondering if you can talk about that a little bit, and what the industry overall can and is doing to help ensure a safe and healthy travel experience for passengers. Can you talk about some of those initiatives a little bit?
Yeah, so I'll start in terms of what the industry has been doing. When we look at other crises, the industry in the past has been somewhat criticized on how slow it has been to react to some of these past crises. But in the case of this pandemic, when it first really hit the global stage around March, and around March is when you began to see many of the countries' shutdowns, restrictions, airlines really downsizing their operations. We got to the point in that March timeframe when industry, under the leadership of ICAO, which is the International Civil Aviation Organization, the UN's branch for aviation, and with working with ourselves, CANSO, the ACI, the Airports Trade Association, we came together really on the urgency that we had to come up and develop biosafety protocols. That was going to be the first step that was going to help us restart and reinitiate our industry from two standpoints. One, convince governments that it was safe to travel, and two, convince the traveling public that the industry had been responsible to implement the right procedures that would safeguard their safety. Mm-hmm. This took place in March. In June, beginning of June, we already had these biosafety protocols approved by ICAO, approved by the majority of the countries, and already being implemented by airports and airlines. Within 2.5 months, we were able to bring governments, industry together, medical, the World Health Organization, to work on these biosafety protocols. What we did not want to do was create some of these mistakes that we had done in the past. With 9/11, if you remember, with the shutdown and restarting the industry back then, countries began to develop and implement their own security measures. And that was something that we saw with a mistake. Today, the pandemic was much graver of a challenge than we had with security back then. It affected the livelihood and the well-being of passengers. Mm-hmm. So we could not get it wrong. So the biosafety measures really put accountability on what airports needed to do, what the airlines needed to do, and what the responsibility of the governments to oversight this. That would be able to get us back in the air as quickly as possible. What has changed? And obviously for those folks watching us that have traveled, the travel experience is very different. And it's different from even before you get to the airport, because now the passenger has to be ready to travel before he leaves his home. He needs to be fit to travel, so he cannot have the symptoms. He has to feel well. He has to board. He needs to print his boarding pass. If he's going to check in baggage, he has to print that. So a lot of legwork has to be done before, and the passenger is responsible for that. And once he gets to the airport, well, obviously you're going to have social distancing. You're going to have to wear the mask. There's going to be whatever assistance that you will have is probably going to be with some sort of kiosk, and it's going to be touchless, and there's going to be very little interaction amongst the passenger and the staff before you get on the airplane. And then once you get on the airplane, the experience is going to be very different. First, the way they clean the airplanes, they disinfect the airplanes, it's changed. You have to wear a mask throughout the entire journey. The level of service is going to be very different. Meal service, getting up and moving in within the airplane. And you're going to have to follow these protocols in a very rigid manner, because if not, as airlines are applying procedures, you'll be asked to be offloaded to the airplane. And even your arrival experience will be different in terms of how you collect your baggage and so on. So the way you travel is a very different experience. the responsibility is different. And the procedures at the airlines and the airports and custom agents and security agents are going about, it's a totally different and radical change, but a change that is needed in order to, one, ensure that the industry is acting responsibly. And that's our calling card to our governments to permit us to get back into the air, that we are not going to be a vector of the transmission of the virus, which is very important, that air transport is providing a service of you reuniting families, being able to transport cargo, but we're not that vector of the virus, that we're bringing the virus from one area to another. Mm-hmm. And since March, we've been able to, through data, show that only 40 cases of 1.2 billion passengers that have traveled have actually, let's say, proven that they've acquired the virus through the transmission from another person on board the airplane. When you think about 40 cases in 1.2 billion passengers since the beginning of the year to where we are, that shows what the industry has been able to do in so little time. Before the biosafety protocols took place in June, airlines and airports were already taking precautions. And since then, now on a global, we have procedures that are going to safeguard this. And now we have testing that has come on board, that it is another layer that's going to help us, again, restart air travel around the world. Because right now, the big challenge is getting airplanes into the air. We have more airplanes on the ground than we do have in the air. If you look in the US here, we live in Florida, and we can't go to New York without being quarantined for 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And that's the challenge that we face. Not only going outside our country, but even within our country, there are significant restrictions to travel.
It's really remarkable. You mentioned 40 cases. That is just such an unbelievable statistic, but really, it really speaks to the great work that's been done in the aviation industry to deal with this issue. The other thing I think you pointed out very well is that it's not only important to do the right thing, it's important to be seen doing the right thing, because that relates to passenger confidence and legislator confidence in what we're doing and so forth. So very good points. You also touched on testing, and I wonder if you could talk about that a little more. That's a little bit more recent of a phenomenon than some of the other things. What are you seeing in that regard? And is that something, with respect to airlines doing testing, is that something that IATA is encouraging and supportive of?
Well, the first thing that we've said, actually, we see testing as an alternative to remove quarantines. Our big concern that we have on a global scale is the quarantine measures, because that's going to hinder any recovery of an industry. It's going to hinder passengers from traveling, because if you're going to get on an airplane for business or for leisure purposes, the one thing you don't want to do, either domestically or international, have to sit in a hotel or at a government authorized residency for 2 weeks while
Right.
you wait out your quarantine. Testing has come a long way over the last several months in terms of the quality, the reliability, and we see that as right now, until we were able to come up with a vaccine and make it available to everyone, testing is going to be the alternative. What have we said? Again, any health measurement that is put into play should be a government responsibility. It should not be a responsibility of the airline industry. The responsibility of the industry, of an airline or an airport, is to ensure that there's right levels of safety, efficiencies, protocols within their area of responsibility. An airline is responsible to transport a passenger from point A to point B in a safe and effective manner. They really shouldn't be the ones responsible to make sure if the passenger is positive or negative. That should be a government responsibility. However, if we want to act responsibly and quickly and get airplanes and get our industry back in the air as quickly as possible, well, the industry's had to take this leadership role. And we've seen this in Europe, we're seeing it in Canada, we're seeing it in the US, where airlines are taking it upon themselves. They're partnering with different medical companies, organizations to do this type of testing. What we're advocating to governments all around the world is testing is reliable, but we need to make sure it meets certain criteria. One, it needs to be fast. We can't wait 4 or 5 days to be able to do a test. And that's a major challenge when we're looking at it holistically from a global perspective. Even here in Florida, there's times that, just up to a couple of weeks ago, you could wait for your test results 4 or 5 days. In that case, you wouldn't meet most of the entry requirements for many countries to be able to fly. So it needs to be fast. It needs to be accurate. The level of integrity needs to be there. And we need to be very watchful for fraud, because this is a huge opportunity for fraudsters to take advantage. And instead of protecting passengers, we're going to put them in harm's way. So accuracy is very important. It needs to be affordable. Because if we're going to impose the cost on the passenger, it needs to be affordable for them to be able to do. Right now, when you see many of the carriers around the world that offer this service, they have different levels of pricing. It could be as cheap as $55, as high as $220. So that's quite expensive when you're looking to travel as a family or a regular business person. So if a regular business person is traveling frequently, he may have to take a PCR test 2 or 3 times within 5 or 6 days. So that's a costly proposition for the traveler to have to assume. So it has to be affordable, and it has to be scalable. Right now, the loads are quite low, but passengers will come back. And with the public confidence, people are going to want to travel. So we need to make sure we have the right infrastructure in place, and we have the right amount of testings available. Now, the challenge is, where are we going to do this testing? Will it be within the airport facility? That may be an alternative now, but as you well know, as the loads and passengers begin to travel again, many of our airports around the world, in the US, Latin America, Europe, are quite saturated as it is. Sure. So you really can't focus a large amount of space just for the testing. So we'll have to see, can it be done off-site but close enough? Or what we're doing with many airlines, they'll send the kits to their homes. But right now, I would say we're open to all options. While our preference is testing should be made available and required on departure, we know many countries are going to say, well, we want to do it on arrival. And we may want to have contact tracing, and we may require passengers to do follow-up testing within 2 or 3 days, like it's occurring in some islands in Hawaii. At this point, we cannot be too stingy, and we cannot be too forceful. And we have to acclimate. And today's a new norm. Tomorrow will be a new norm. And we have to continuously acclimate to the changing environment. But testing is rapidly evolving. We're seeing this is certainly the means and the way to move forward. And until a vaccine is made forward, we see testing is going to be around probably maybe for another year.
Wow. Okay. Very interesting. Peter, does the current situation that we're talking about present an opportunity for airlines to sort of fundamentally transform their business models, really by necessity due to the pandemic, the business model and kind of their way of doing business? What do you see there?
So technology is certainly going to play a very important role moving forward. The pandemic has forced us to really invest and fast track a lot of the technology investments that we would have done scattered throughout 2 or 3 years. The airlines have seen this as a good opportunity to fast track and implement much quicker. In the way you go about preparing for your travel experience and how you will walk through an airport. It's going to give us a lot more opportunities where your phone is, your iPhone or your Samsung phone are going to play a much more important role in your travel experience and how you go about preparing and going through the whole travel experience throughout the airport and onto the aircraft. So technology is going to play a very important role. I'll also say in terms of, we have to see what the landscape will have for us in terms of who's going to be the key actors, which airlines will still be around, how long will it take for them to react and provide the level of service that they were in terms of connectivity than before. Ultra low cost, legacy, I think they will all play a role. I think we probably will see an economic crisis following this. So we're going to have to adapt to those changes. So airlines will readjust. They will take, I believe, more care of their customers. And I think we're beginning to see those of us who are frequent travelers, that we may not have been on an airplane over the last several months. The connection between the airline and the customer has probably never been better than it has now. The airline has continuously gone on to their passengers and asked for their well-being. When will you travel? What do you need? Ask for recommendations. So there's going to be a closer connection. And we're seeing a lot of CEOs doing a wonderful job, really going out publicly and convincing public it is safe to travel. We are being responsible. We're improving our level of service. It won't be the same level of service that we had before, but it's going to be a different type of level of service. You're going to see possibly a more humane interaction between what the airline used to provide before than it's doing right now. But the playing field may be very different. And again, we have to see how many airlines will have to readapt. This year, so far, we've had 40 airlines that have closed their operations. They will not come back. And the crisis will continue for the short term, and we have to see how many more will unfortunately falter. So the landscape will change, but we are going to see an industry that will be dynamic, providing a different level of service. I think customers will be much happier in what the travel experience will be moving forward in the years to come.
Is that, let me just follow up, is that what you meant by a more humane experience? Is that they're happier with the experience that the airlines are providing?
I think so. And you see it through social media. We do still see, the difficult situations and interactions between a flight attendant or a passenger, but we're seeing more of the good examples of the flight attendant going that extra mile, or the passenger service person at the gate helping a passenger in need. We're seeing that it's really a game changer that we didn't have before. And I'll just add one other thing with technology. You're going to see different types of flights taking place. Boeing, Airbus, Embraer have done a wonderful job in enhancing, improving the type of airplanes that are being made available. So while we're in crisis today, these type of aircraft are going to give us also a different experience of what you enjoy on board, a healthier experience, and also a connectivity experience. We won't have the 380 or the 747-400s flying as we did in the past, but we will have more 350s, more 787 fly longer distances, more point-to-point that we did before. So the 22,000 city pair connections that we had last year, that will gradually increase in the years to come. So people will have more destinations to travel to than we did even last year.
Mm-hmm. Very good. And just to verify, you said that there were 40 air carriers that have ceased operation during the pandemic. I just wanted to verify that.
Yeah, since the beginning of the year, we've had approximately 40 airlines that have, unfortunately ceased operations.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Let me shift gears a little bit. You've had a very interesting career. You spent the early part of your career at Iberia, Spain's largest airline. What led you to pursue a career in aviation and ultimately land at Iberia?
So I have to say, you hear this from many people in aviation. Once you come into the aviation business, you never leave it. It's in your blood. Well, I think I was born with it because Both of my parents were in the airline industry. I come from a family that is heavily indulged in aviation. Both of my parents worked in Iberia. So I was early influenced, and I was very privileged. Very different aviation back then. I was born in the DC-8, 747, 200, 100 era, 727s. But it was cultivated in my DNA very early on. I was very fortunate to be able to travel at a young age. During my parents worked, my mother worked at the airport for many years, so I was able to, as a young child, see what she was doing, able to see things that today TCA would probably arrest me for being able to do what we used to do back then. Sure. So I was very privileged to see aviation from a different perspective, and I fell in love with it. And I was able to get into Iberia while I was in college. But one thing, my mother was the senior executive of the airline at the time, so she wanted no favoritisms towards me. She said, if he's going to get into the business, he's going to learn all aspects of the business. So I was hired for one job, which I thought was so attractive. And I found out that I was going to be in the bag room, loading baggage for the first 2.5 months, and slowly climb my way through the different ranks of the organization until I got to my job. So I was not very happy the first 2 months, but I'm very, very happy the way I progressed, because I was able to learn the different facets of aviation. And you look at, from an airline standpoint, it is so diverse, it's so different in so many aspects, and it is so integral that one cannot work without the other. And many of the traveling public doesn't see that on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. So there was no favoritism in the family situation there. That's good. So what?
Absolutely not.
So what? How did your work experience at Iberia? What kind of positions did you have there that really prepared you the most for the type of advocacy work you do now on behalf of the industry at IATA?
Well, it's I was able to go through a very interesting period of time of Iberia's life at the time. As I said, bag room was my first official job, loading bags. Not very attractive, but then I became, I think, the funnest job I ever had when you're 19 years old was coordinating flights. I was the main guy. Go from the university to the airport. We had one flight a day. It was a DC-10 from 2. The flight got in at 3 and it departed at 5. And I had to make sure that I had the caterers, I had the ground staff ready, I had the APU, I had the cargo all set up and structured. And when that DC-10 got in, I had to make sure everything was offloaded within a reasonable amount of time and get the plane turned around to unload everything and get it out on time. And, there was, not one normal day. Every day was different. Every day was exciting. Every day was challenging for a 19-year-old, and how everything had to work systematically. You need to make sure you had all passengers on board before you close the door. You need to make sure you had enough fuel on board, and you need to make sure you had the baggage on board, because the last thing you wanted to do is get a message from Madrid that you missed a container that was left behind with 200 bags, which probably represented about 60 passengers. That was not good. So to me, the day-to-day operation, that was really a huge learning in how important it is to get a turnaround within that allotment of time. Then I moved on to flight operations, and that's where I really learned the business. I was in load control, flight ops, flight planning, again, for a small operation. But the one caveat that added to that DC-10 or 747 is that Miami became the focal point for its hub distribution to Central America. Something that's seen very much in the US. And every day we would have flights from Madrid come in, and we would have to disperse the passengers and the cargo and the baggage onto small DC-9s and then 320s, and disperse those flights into Latin America. And then bring those flights back, get them back on the airplanes and back to Europe. And that showed me how important, again, you needed to have good teamwork, good coordination. I learned about, how important the reservation system is. I never thought about, what the reservation desk did for us. And that desk could be in Madrid, it could be in Manila, it could be in Bogota. And what important role they had to play when one of our flights was delayed or canceled. They were on the ball, having to reprogram these passengers on other flights. So I learned about fuel efficiency, how important it is to load an airplane correctly, really the one-on-ones of flight operations. But the most important thing I learned there was the importance of treating passengers right, customer service. I learned how important it is about treating customers the right way, treating your team members responsibly, with care, but also being affirmative when you need to, because we needed to make sure we got those airplanes out on time. So it was a tremendous learning on the job, which is, one thing is learning with the books for my dispatcher's license and going through the university. But one thing is learning on the job when you have a misconnection and you have to help a passenger who needs to get to Zurich or to Milan because they're going to miss their wedding if they're not there on time. Or, we had cases that we were transporting live organs and how important that is. Passengers would never know that. And I didn't know that it is very common to transfer live organs on a commercial flight, and making sure that we get that, and the logistics have to be in play and to help save someone's life that you'll never meet, and they'll never know that you helped get that airplane out there really quick to make sure that was at the destination when it needed to do. So many learnings throughout that prepare me to be where I am now.
That's great. There are a lot of important lessons in what you just said, and treating people the right way is one of those. And it sounds like you got some excellent preparation at a very early age for what you're doing now. So it sounds like your experience there was quite fulfilling. So the industry's changed a lot since you first joined it, of course. Can you talk a little about some of those, some of the important changes that have come about over the past 25 years in the industry? What's had some real significant effects in your mind?
So I'll give you a couple as a passenger, and I'll give it also as being part of that change environment. I remember when I was in university, I studied in New Orleans for a period of time. And again, my parents were in the airline business, and I would come back and forth. And when I would go up to university, my mother would give me a stock of tickets. And she taught me how to fill out a non-revenue ticket. And Peter, when you're coming back, this is what you have to do. Today, we have no tickets. Today, everything is electronic. We don't write tickets. We don't print tickets anymore. Everything is called e-ticketing nowadays. And as a consumer, that has gone away. All these millennials, that 20-year-old kids don't know what a ticket looks like. In my office, I have a framed copy of what one of the last few tickets were. And that's what IATA help drive in advocating the industry on the importance that what e-ticketing would drive us to. And how much of a savings it would be for passengers, for the airlines. Airlines lost millions of dollars every year in missing stock tickets or unusable tickets. That has gone now out the window. So the experience has traveled. Now, it's not about carrying a paper ticket. It's about having your boarding card and your ticket receipt on your phone. So to me, that was one of the things that has changed. Also, what has changed is the way we travel. The comfort level is very, very different. The entertainment. Some people love it. Some people hate it. You're connected on an airplane anytime, anywhere in the world now. So for those who need to be connected all the time, you're going to know how your baseball team or the stock market is doing through the entire journey. And the reliability of that connectivity is enhancing and improving every day. You could actually, in many airlines now, watch your football game live on TV. You don't have to now, be on an airplane for 5 hours and pray to God, oh my God, what is my team doing? Did it win? Did it lose? Please, pilot, give us the news. That has changed. The comfort, the level, what we have, the travel experience is very different from what we have on the ground to the air. Even our airports now look like are better malls and have better restaurants than some of our malls, traditional malls that we're used to driving to. So again, the experience is traveling, is changing. And I think the most important change that I've seen is, again, I go back to what the manufacturers have done. One, it is safer today than any time in our history to travel. And I think that's the most, I actually should have started with that. And I apologize, being a safety guy myself. It has never been safer to travel than today. And that is a tribute to universities like yourself, that is in research, in what we have been able to do with enhanced proximity warning, with TCAS. I remember when I was in Iberia back in the 80s, I remember our airplanes used to be shuttled in, the 747s and DC-10s, into Miami. We dropped off the passengers, and then we would ferry the airplanes to Orlando to install the Honeywell enhanced ground proximity warning systems. You know, this was back in the 80s, not so long ago. And today, how many savings, flight accident savings have we obtained thanks to that type of equipment, or TCAS? So technology has made our industry so much safer, but technology has also helped us be closer to our families, to our loved ones, and to be able to discover more parts of the world. You know, back, you know, again, in the 70s, 80s, even in the early 90s, our 747s, DC-10s, A300s couldn't fly around the world, couldn't do journeys of 18 hours. You know, not too long ago, I did Newark, Singapore, 18 hours, 45 minutes. I don't know how I survived, but it was a wonderful experience. And I was able to take off from New York in the morning and land in Singapore the next day in the afternoon. We couldn't do that. Back then, we would probably need 2 or 3 stops before getting to our journey. So our manufacturers have done a wonderful job with the 787, A330s to be able to provide us those long-range flights. But also, they've done a wonderful job with the A320neos or the 737s that are going to be flying over the Atlantic. And they're going to give us a type of connectivity that we didn't have before. You know, in the future, you will be able to fly from New York to Malaga or to Toulouse that you weren't able to do before because the 747 or the 340 or the 330 are just too big for that flight segment. So you're able to do that flight journey using a 320 or using a 737 MAX and bringing 120 passengers to do that type of journey. Today from Panama, you can fly from Panama City to Buenos Aires, almost 7 hours, 45 minutes plus the fuel reserve, which provides an opportunity to connect cities that you weren't able to do before. So regardless if you're in Miami or you're in Hamburg or you're in Cordoba in Argentina or you're in Halifax, you're better connected today because of the type of technology that the manufacturers have put in place, either the wide bodies or the narrow bodies. And that is going to continue to evolve, and that's going to bring prices down. It's going to bring more connectivities, and people are going to be able to travel more than before. And also with the middle class growing around the world, more people will be on these airplanes. So I would say comfort, safety, and technology have really evolved. And from my part, and in IATA, we've been involved in several segments in that part, from the e-ticketing to safety enhancements in different countries. We played our little role in helping advocate for those improvements.
All great points. And, you know, I was reflecting while you were describing that the passengers probably appreciate the fact that they could fly tonight and watch game 1 of the World Series. But what I think about with the technology is all the amazing things that have been done relative to safety. And you described that very clearly. And in my mind, that's obviously the most important thing. whether the passengers actually see some of that or not, the safety enhancements have been amazing in the last 25 years.
Absolutely. And what's wonderful about this, when you look at it 20 years ago, usually the airlines with the highest safety rates were those in the US, Canada, and Europe. And the rest of the world was always challenged to catch up. And the investment that has been made, and it's, I think, a tribute to the airline leadership, particularly in developing regions, understanding that without a safe environment, without a safe industry, you have no industry. And that's why for many years, Latin America, Africa, parts of Asia were always in catch-up mode. Now, it's a very different scenario. Look at Qatar Airways, Emirates, LATAM Airlines out of Mexico. These are some wonderful airlines that are leading the way, and in some cases have even exceeded those of Europe and the US in terms of leading airlines of the world. But that was a very different game 20 years ago because safety was not part of their number one agenda item. Today, it is by far the most important, and it is a DNA, it's a cultural transformation. Technology has a lot to do with it, but you could put great technology on airplanes, but if the staff, employees do not understand the importance, do not buy into it, and do not live by it every day, and more importantly, there is a non-punitive system in place, you can't obtain those gains. And that's where the industry really has made some great achievements in the last 20 years.
Mm-hmm. And I certainly applaud IATA's advocacy for safety. Your organization has done a great job in that regard.
Thank you.
I did want to ask you one more pandemic question, if I could, that I omitted earlier. I was thinking about Latin America, that market, and they export a lot of products to the US and around the world. And a lot of cargo flights operate between the state of Florida and Latin America. How has the cargo segment of the industry been impacted by the pandemic?
Yeah, so, Miami is a major hub for cargo, as there are many other parts of the world. When you have 80% of scheduled air travel, that was the percent that we had in April that got put on the ground. So in April, 80% of scheduled air travel was basically canceled on the ground. That had a huge impact on cargo because most of the cargo movement were in the belly of the passenger aircraft. Mm-hmm. And when you had the scheduled service canceled and with restrictions of entry, that had a huge implication on cargo. I'll give you a stat. Since March of this year, there's been 47,000 special cargo flights that have had to move all around the world. Mm-hmm. And as many of our viewers may know, even many of our passenger flights, 777s, 330s, 350s, that would be accustomed to transporting passengers as well, were being utilized as cargo freight aircraft. So the top of the passenger cabin were being transformed into movement of cargo. And it was so important because early on in the month of March, April, May, all around the world, for the US, for Europe, Latin America, it was all about moving cargo shipments to really fight the pandemic, the COVID virus, with ventilators, with equipment, with masks. The vast majority of the masks were coming out of China. Mm-hmm. So if you were able to get into flight radar and you kind of just looked at what the movement of flights were, it's amazing the amount of flights that were going into China, back and forth, all across the world, just to move cargo. Because at that point, it was all about saving lives and making sure that we could get ventilators and medical equipment and masks throughout the entire world. And at the same time, we need to live. We need to eat. Many of the fish that we eat here in the U.S. comes from Chile. Right. The flowers that that we have in our homes comes from Ecuador or from Kenya. So the movement of cargo was so important. and business still needs to be moving. Our iPhones, our Samsung phones don't come by boat. They come on board airplanes. So our regular lives, even during this crisis that we were all living, we still needed to move Intel chips and other important equipment that is needed for the day-to-day business. So again, what little money the airlines have been able to gain was because of cargo. It was cargo and also repatriation flights. We had over 40,000 repatriation flights around the world. I can tell you early on, my team was working endless hours with governments in Latin America to get approvals for airlines to fly into the region, but not traditional airlines. Not the Aviancas or the Lufthansa. We were bringing Philippine Airlines into Peru to pick up marine sailors who were on cruise boats, or into Miami. You never would see a Philippine Airlines airplane here. You never saw a Swiss airplane into Paraguay, but there was a large concentration of Germans and Swiss living there. So we needed to repatriate them. Iberia Airlines had their first flight to Australia using 2 different stops. So we were seeing airplanes that you would never see on a normal place flying all parts of the world. Avianca in Beijing, and so on and so on.
Sure.
So during the early months, it was all about emergency response, and cargo played an integral part of it. And one important fact, we will need about 8,000 747s to transport the amount of vaccines that will be needed early on for about, I believe, I don't have the exact number, I apologize. I believe it's about 1 billion people around the world for one vaccine, about 8,000 747 aircraft. Now, we know we don't have 8,000 747s around the world. So that's how, but it shows you the magnitude of aircraft uplift that will be needed just to transport the vaccine around the world. And just to add a little bit more on the importance of logistics and cargo, on the importance of safely transporting the vaccines around the world. Many times the goods that are transported are destroyed or not handled properly. We as an industry, for the good of the well-being of our citizens around the world, we cannot mishandle these vaccines. So one of the things that the industry is already now working on is the logistics for when the vaccines are available to be able to transport them all around the world. And that's going to be what our CEO says, probably one of the most important missions that aviation has ever had to undergo, is all these vaccines that will have to go around the world.
Excellent point. Wow. 8,000 747s worth of, interesting.
If Boeing knew about that, they would have not taken the 747 off the line.
Yeah. Let me ask you about slots. Just very few people kind of understand how slot systems work. And in the US, there are very few airports that require departure and landing slots, but many airports around the world do. IATA's Worldwide Airport Slots Group allocates and manages those slots and has done so since the 70s. Can you share a little bit about how that process works?
Yeah, so slots, it's all about, let me put it as easily as I can. Because we don't have enough infrastructure in the world, we can meet the wants and the needs of all airlines at the same time, in the same place. This is a competitive world, competitive business. Everyone wants to operate at the same time everyone else does, because you want to get in, get your passengers, get back to your hubs, and be able to disperse them. Because we don't have adequate amount of infrastructure and available either runway infrastructure or terminal infrastructure, the slot system, what it does, the industry gets together several times a year to allocate slots in different airports around the world. And we have different levels of constraints in airports around the world. Some are the most constrained, which are level 3 airports. Those are like London Heathrow, New York Kennedy Airport, where you have large amounts of movement and your infrastructure is very limited. And when I mean limited, it doesn't mean small terminals. It means it just doesn't have enough gates or runways to be able to accommodate. So we have to give, airlines and airports have to work together on being able to put their schedules together with the resources, infrastructure resources that are available. And again, in an airport that is not slot constrained, well, you have a lot more accessibility. You can choose when you want to fly to, the time of the day, and you're not going to have any impairments. But when you want to fly into JFK's New York airport, well, you can't fly at 3:30 in the afternoon from Europe when you're a startup, or you want to have a new frequency into that airport, or into Mexico City, or into Narita in Tokyo. You're going to have to accept what's available. And that's why sometimes you don't see new entrants into the market, because the time that's good for them, the airport's not available. But what the World Slot Guidelines tries to do is it makes it fair and equitable for everyone, even new entrants, because we want to make sure that the industry continues to grow, it continues to grow responsibly and fairly, and that there's a transparent mechanism in place. So there is no behind the doors negotiating taking place where one airline all of a sudden has the slot at the time it wants, while another airline's been waiting 4 years for it. So it's done very collaboratively with very stringent guidelines in place. And you have coordinators that are responsible to make sure that the airport and the airline are able to reach consensus and agreement. But we certainly would hope we didn't have World Slot Guidelines, but because infrastructure is limited, we have it. But I will say on the positive side, it shows that our industry continues to grow. It continues to evolve. More airlines are connecting the world. More people want to travel. And that obviously has a constraint on our business. But we're seeing, you go to New York today, the investments that are taking place at JFK, at LaGuardia, brand new facilities that will help us. Chicago O'Hara is going to invest $8 billion in their infrastructure. And the infrastructure may not be needed today, but it will be needed within the next 20 years when we are expected to more than double global connectivity around the world.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. I want to be mindful of our time. I do want to ask you, Peter, what is your advice to our current and future students who might want to follow a path similar to yours and work in the industry?
So first of all, I want to say beware, because if you're kind of seeing if you like this industry or not, once you touch it and you get in it, you'll never get out of it. Okay, you just won't, because it's such a passionate industry. And regardless if you're in an airline or in an airport or you're part of the entire aviation chain, you are probably doing good for many people around the world. It is an industry that has huge amounts of reward. I always say now in my advocacy to governments, aviation is probably the backbone of many of our economies around the world and for social well-being around the world. It's highly dependent. Our industry, people depend on air transportation. It is an industry that continues to evolve. It evolves very, very quickly. The pandemic has required us to evolve quicker. Our industry is changing. So one thing I would recommend, read. There is so much material, so much out there. Listen to the innovators, listen to the business leaders. Some of the best business people in the world today are in our industry, and they're evolving this industry in an amazing pace. And it's also important to see how contradictory they can be. The mindset of many of our business leaders in the US are very different from the aviation leaders in other parts of the world. And that's what makes this industry also so fascinating. How it's evolved. It's not all about the legacy traveler airlines anymore. You look at the ultra low cost airlines, how they have contributed to industry. You research them, learn how aviation has evolved. And today, the traditional airlines cannot live without the ultra low cost. And you may say, well, Peter, they're competitors of each other. The traditional airlines, American, United, Lufthansa, is better off today thanks to Southwest, Ryanair, and JetSmart. Mm-hmm. These traditional airlines have been obligated to transform their business thanks to these new types of airlines. And in between them, you have the hybrid airlines. And they have revolutionized. Mm-hmm. So to all those who are interested in aviation, and I'm talking from the airline standpoint, but you look at how GDS's, the distribution of the reservation systems, or how air traffic control has changed with technology, with GPS and RNAV, it's evolving. So don't think what you learn in maybe your first semester of school is, it'll probably change by the time you get to your third year of your undergraduates. And it certainly will change by the time you get to your master's, because it continues to evolve. So my recommendation, continue to learn, be open-minded, because one thing we can't be in this industry is closed-minded, because our industry continues to evolve. It will continue to change. And if you are closed-minded, you will be pushed out of the industry. Always think outside the box, always challenge, because those who have challenged, from Herb Keller back in the 70s with their Southwest, to Mr. Akbar at Qatar Airlines, to what Ed Bastian is doing in Delta today, which is remarkable. These are thought leaders who have revolutionized the industry. And there's many, many others who have done the same. And there's no doubt in your undergraduate programs or your master's program, the future leaders are there. CEOs of an airline, the CEO of an air navigation service provider, the next Secretary of Transport, or the next FAA administrator is probably sitting in one of the classrooms there today. And who knows, they'll probably be my boss in the next couple of years, and looking forward to that. So think outside the box, never stop challenging, and learn. And because we are blessed in the industry to have very good leaders and innovators that are changing and evolving our industry every day.
That's great advice. Thank you very much. And Peter, I can't believe how quickly this hour has flown by. I thank you so much. This was a great conversation. I think we could have probably gone on for another couple hours here, but I want to be respectful of your time and the time of our audience. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been an honor to have you on.
The honor is all mine. Thank you very much. Thank you for the education that your university has given me, and what it is doing for the entire aviation industry around the world. We have tremendous respect for you. We have a great partnership with your institution. And again, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak this afternoon.
Thanks so much. Pleasure was ours.
Thank you.
On Thursday, November 5th, Aviation Outlook will welcome Ted Christie, President and Chief Executive Officer of Spirit Airlines, for our last webinar of the year. Christie joined Spirit in April 2012 as Spirit's Senior Vice President and Chief Financial Officer. In subsequent years, he also served as Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer. In 2018, Christie was promoted to President with overall responsibility for the finance and commercial functions, as well as operations, IT, and human resources. Last year, he added CEO to his title. Prior to joining Spirit, Christie served as the Chief Financial Officer of Pinnacle Airlines Corporation, a holding company with subsidiaries flying as Delta Connection, United Express, and US Airways. Christie earned a Bachelor of Business Administration and Finance from the University of Arizona in 1992. I'm really looking forward to that discussion. Thanks once again to Peter Cerdá and to the people behind the scenes and those of you who join us from around the world to help make Aviation Outlook possible. I'm Alan Stolzer. We hope to see you for our next webinar on November 5th. Thank you for joining us, and good night.